what happens when we hear certain false doctrines or teachings that enter into the church or into people's lives? How do we handle that? Do we just sit by and let all of the false teaching enter into people's lives, or do we actually do something about it? And so this verse, which is found in probably a letter that you don't read a lot, yet it is a very important letter, which comes from Jesus's half-brother Jude, in the letter that Jude writes to the church that he was writing to in verses 3, which I'll be talking about today. And this is a very verse because it sets up the stage for what Jude is going to speak about throughout the rest of his letter. And his letter is not long. It's only 25 verses. So in the short letter that Jude is trying to portray a message, he has to get across all the points that he wants to. And the main thing that he is battling against during the time that he was in was the teachings of false teachers that started to arrive not long after Jesus' ascension. This letter is written definitely less than 100 years after Jesus is ascended, yet there were still false teachings that entered into the church. And so although Jude had the original purpose to sort of strengthen the believers in this letter, he wanted to press on a more urgent issue, which was confronting the false teachers of the church. But before he even confronts the false teachers, he mentions our attitude in how we confront the false doctrines in this world. And that's what he says in verse 3. He says, "Beloved, while I was making every effort to write to you about our common salvation, I felt the necessity to write to you, exhorting that you contend earnestly for the faith which was once for all handed down to the saints." Contend earnestly for the faith which was once for all handed down to the saints. That is the main phrase I kind of want to focus on. I already mentioned how Jude was originally going to write this about strengthening believers in their salvation. Notice how in verse 3 he notes the beloved. This is another word for the elect of God, the chosen ones, the ones who have been predestined according to God's sovereign choice. And he gives them this command. He feels the necessity. This is something that needs to occur. And I thought it was crazy that false teaching started to enter into the church. Different gospels, as you can say, started to enter into the church because, as I mentioned before, Jesus' ascension is very recent. It's not something that has happened across hundreds of years. This is very recent, and yet there are so many false teachings entering into the church. And so, as a generation living 2,000 years later, how many false teachings do we see now? I think that number has only increased and not decreased. But what does Jude say? What does Jude say the response to how we confront false teachings? He says to contend earnestly for the faith which was once for all handed down to the saints. To contend is to compete, to struggle, to fight for. The Greek word for contend in this passage actually comes from the root word in our English language for agony. And if you describe someone that, oh, this person is in deep agony, you would say that that person is in a deep struggle, a deep fight, some kind of suffering. In this context, what Jude is trying to teach us is that there is a struggle when we confront false teachings, and we as Christians have to take that burden. I think the natural response to many of us, and this is what I fear for a lot of us, on how we confront the false doctrines we hear in this world is, we completely hide. We go away from it. We try not to confront it ourselves, either because we're too scared, either because we don't think we're knowledgeable in the Word of God, or it's because we're worried for how the other person will react to us. But Jude is calling for a boldness in his generation, and if his generation faced false teachings like that, how much more should we be bold in our lives? Just like how an athlete, and that's kind of where the Greek word comes from, how an athlete has to strain their muscles to work out and to get better at something, to compete for that prize. It's a common analogy that Paul often uses throughout his letters as well. We as Christians also have a race that we need to run, a race that we need to fight. So many of us want to hide away from the false teachings that arrives, but God has given us the sword of the Spirit, the Word of God, to literally battle against all the false teachings that comes. The faith which was once for all handed down to the saints. This faith that God has given us is not from ourselves, it is from Him. It has been taught throughout the Word of God over and over again, and it's something that comes from Jesus. We can point to the Bible and say, this is what faith is, because the Bible defines what it is for us, which was once for all handed down to the saints. This means that the church is equipped with the faith that God has given because, as the letter says, it is written to the beloved, people who are chosen by God. And so as chosen children of God, we have been equipped with the faith. We know the faith. We know the truth, the way, the truth, and the life. And so because we know that truth, everything else that contradicts or goes against the truth, which is Jesus, is a lie. And so whenever there is a false teaching that enters in your life, or something that you know is not what the scriptures teach, contend earnestly for the faith. Fight, compete. There is a struggle involved with it, but that's what the Bible commands us to do. I hope this video blessed you. On that note, take care and God bless.